Επόμενος ομιλητής, ο δημοσιογράφος και συγγραφέας, κύριος Ιαν Μάρτιν, ο οποίος ήταν για πολύ μεγάλο χρονικό διάστημα αρχισυντάκτης της εφημερίδας Scotsman, αλλά που επίσης συνεργάζεται με πολλές εφημερίδες, όπως για παράδειγμα η Telegraph, η Financial Times, αλλά και το βασικότερο είναι συγγραφέας αρκετών βιβλίων. Mr. Martin, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. And thank you for the invitation to contribute to this debate in these extraordinary surroundings. And I'm also particularly grateful because we are conscious, most of us in Britain, that our taste for introspection on the European question does rather risk boring or even annoying our friends and neighbours in the other parts of Europe. So thank you for your patience and thank you for taking the time to actually listen to a pair of Brits, Simon Nixon, my old friend, and Dennis McShane, bang on about Europe again. And I think, I mean, let's face it, from the start, the Brits have always had a curious relationship with the European project. We were reluctant entrants in the 1970s because we felt that our economy was broken and that we needed to copy the European model. And ever since then, the British have become the #1 country in Europe for complaining. It's what we're best at. We are world leaders when it comes to moaning about the European Union. But the joy is now, finally, at last, after decades of moaning, the Brits really have to put up or shut up. The Brits have to make a decision. Are they going to stick with, as I'm going to argue, a broken down model and leave the European Union, or stick with it and carry on boring the rest of Europe with our complaints forevermore? And I must admit that I'm a reluctant Brexiteer. I didn't necessarily expect to be arguing the case for Britain leaving the European Union. I hoped that the Prime Minister, David Cameron's attempts to renegotiate our arrangements with the European Union would result in something that really delivered and allowed me and people like me to advocate for staying in a reformed EU. I also don't like most of the highly nationalistic, nativist rhetoric that comes from quite a lot of Brexiteers. I'm thinking particularly of, you may have heard of the UK Independence Party and the infamous Nigel Farage. And they have a way of talking about Europe that I reject. I was with one of them recently who said to me, well, you're like me, you're British, you're not European. To which I responded, well, I am British, I'm Scottish as well, but I am European. Europe and the European Union are not necessarily the same thing. The UK cannot leave Europe. Europe is a geographical and cultural fact. And our shared culture, very conscious of saying this particularly in Greece, is one of the glories of human civilization and human advancement. At stake in the British referendum really is whether the European Union, as currently constituted and developed, is serving Europe well. And I've concluded with regret that the EU doesn't serve Britain well, and just as importantly, it doesn't serve the rest of Europe particularly well either. First, in Britain, you hear a lot of talk about how this is all about immigration and that this is inherently terrible and that millions of voters in Britain are adopting a racist position when they say that they're particularly concerned about free movement and about immigration. But Britain is a country which has thrived on immigration. The world is on the move. There is going to be lots of immigration in the decades to come as globalization takes its next twist. But Britain used to pretty much had around 50,000, a sort of settled migratory flow, net immigration of around 50,000. Even that brought some cultural tensions, but Britain, to its credit, after some fairly shameful episodes, adapted well and has benefited from immigration. But the figures, as revealed last week, show that net immigration is running at 330,000. So the voters who are very, very concerned about this are not adopting a racist position. They are worried about the pressure on public services. They are worried about cultural cohesion. And if the EU was a sensible project that was prepared to learn and adapt properly, it would have accepted by now that the lesson of the last few years is that the concept of freedom of movement itself, which is a very, very nice idea, which was dreamt up by a small number of states, when applied to a continent of 500 million people and the EU with 28 members, is a recipe for disaster, and it has helped to fuel the rise of the populist right. So, and I would argue that not only is the EU model as currently constituted not in Britain's interest, it's not working for the rest of Europe either. On the two most basic criteria of what you would expect a power bloc to do and to deliver, whether it wants to be an empire or not, whether it just wants to be a loose confederation of cooperating states, you would place pretty high economics and currency. And what is the lesson of the last 10 years? A catastrophe inflicted on the peoples, particularly of southern Europe, in pursuit of a dream which many people warned at the time would have precisely those effects. The other thing that you might expect an emerging empire, or as I say, loose confederation, to be good at if it wants to succeed and carry the popular will with it, is protecting its external borders and having a serious policy for its internal borders. So my hope is that if on June the 23rd, Britain votes for self-government, I don't see it in narrowly British terms. It is my hope, my wish, that it should act as a catalyst for a wake-up call for the rest of the European Union. And in essence, it should not be beyond the wit and wisdom of the many smart people on this great continent to devise a way in which we can retain control of our borders. Our democracies will function as proper, coherent democracies, but we trade and cooperate together. That is, in essence, what lots of Brits thought that they were signing up for in the early 1970s, and in the last referendum in 1975. So it's for that reason that I advocate Brexit, not just because I think that Britain would benefit hugely, and I think that the risks to trade are massively exaggerated. Free markets are dynamic. People respond to new situations. Trade deals can be done. It is in the interest of both parties. Britain, which, as I pointed out, is not leaving Europe. It is choosing to have a different relationship with the European Union. It should be possible for people of goodwill to construct a new settlement. So, in conclusion, I advocate Brexit because I think it will lead to a stronger, more self-confident Britain, and you also, as a bonus, our friends and neighbours in the rest of Europe won't have to listen to quite so much British complaining and moaning, which is not just restricted to the weather, obviously. It's our second favourite subject is the EU. But it could also mean a stronger, reformed Europe. So my pitch on Brexit is somewhat unusual on the Brexit side, but I say it as a proud European. Vote Brexit for the sake of Britain, but also for the sake of a greater Europe. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Martin. Νομίζω ότι με την παρέμβασή του, με αυτό τον νηφάλιο τρόπο, έγιναν πιο σαφείς οι θέσεις όσων υποστηρίζουν ότι η Μεγάλη Βρετανία πρέπει να εγκαταλείψει την Ευρωπαϊκή Ένωση.